Hi everybody and welcome. I think we are ready for a change of scenery. Welcome to my new setting in sunny Malaga. Today I want to talk about an important issue that many companies in AI audio and AI music face, but this goes beyond audio-driven startups, and it has more to do with startups and companies that are building highly technological products and have to do with a lot of research and development. And the problem goes like this. So you have a tech product, and so in order to develop that, you have to balance a couple of things. So one is your research, which is highly unpredictable. It's difficult to say when a piece of research is going to be completed and have a roadmap for that. And on the other hand, you have production, so all those kind of engineering things and products related coding processes, and that is way more predictable, right? So the question is, how can you balance production and research? And in this video I want to give you a few tips on how you can do that. My first suggestion is that of separating the two teams, so the production team on the one hand and the research team on the other. More in detail, the production team should be involved with all engineering related stuff, also with DevOps, with ML ops, also building those infrastructures that are needed for running the research that gets output from the research team. And at the same time, the production team should also be responsible for creating those frameworks that can be used internally by the research team. Say, for example, you are an AI audio startup, so you are definitely going to need an AI audio pipeline so that your researchers can use this pipeline and they don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So, for example, writing scripts for training a model, for evaluating it, or for just creating a new architecture. So your production team can create an internal pipeline that then can be given to the researchers, which can take advantage of that. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have the research team. Now, what does the research team do? Well, they actually do research. They are going to just go out there, experiment with new models, at the same time reading a lot of academic literature, because it's important to be on top of the research, academic research and industry research, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel, but rather taking advantage of all the stuff that have been outputted by other researchers. So yeah, the researcher team is more focused on the exploration and playing around with new architectures and reading the literature, whereas the production team is more on the production side of things, so the engineering side. How can you create these two teams? Well, most likely in your team you're going to have a bunch of data scientists and programmers. So you'll see that different people have different strengths and different weaknesses. And usually what you want to do is take all the people who are, for example, more into research, who have been used to reading a lot of academic literature and who like to explore, and put them into the research team, whereas the ones who are more skilled into programming, engineering, data management, so those are those data scientists should go into the production team. Now, it may well be the case that you don't have so many people. Perhaps it's just you doing all the job, but still, this idea of having two teams makes sense. Of course, you're not going to have two literal teams, but rather it's going to be you, and you have to divide the work that you do, and basically just time box the work that you put into for production purposes, and same thing for research. So it could be a one-man show, but divided conceptually into two teams, the production and the research. Another important point is how you manage the development, both both in the production team and in the research team. Now, these two teams should follow very different practices. Regarding the production team, you want to have the best quality of code possible. So the team should be able to write outstanding code that is maintainable, that is modular, that is clean code. So you should follow all of those standards that guarantee that you have high level, high quality production code. And so for that, you want for the production team to use test-driven development, behavioral-driven development, all of those practices that are necessary in order to get fantastic, high-quality code. Because at the end of the day, this is the core value of your company, and you want for this code to be, as I said, maintainable and modular so that you can reuse it down the line and you don't have to scrap everything after a couple of years because everything is crumbling down. Now, on the other side, so with the research team, we are actually at the other end of the spectrum in the sense that the research team can just write also scrappy code. It's not important that the code that they write is high quality. The research team is all about velocity. It's all about writing a lot of code, experimenting with a lot of models and architectures quickly. So they can also use, for example, Jupyter notebooks, which I highly suggest against for the production team. On the one hand, we have the production team, which follows a quite constrained way of developing stuff. On the other hand, we have the research team, which is way more flexible, can experiment way more. So how can we balance like these two things and have a company that, I don't know, like goes in the same direction? So what kind of management processes we can put in place to ensure that we have all the teams actually riding in the same direction? Well, for that, I highly suggest to use a flavor of the agile approach. I prefer to work with Scrum, but you can use Crystal, you can use extreme programming, whatever suits you best. But the basic idea is to work with agile, because agile will enable both teams to work in quick iterations, arrive at something that's releasable, and then move on to the next feature, to the next thing. Now, in terms of the research team, it's important to have a way of managing all of this unpredictability, because as we said, research is highly unpredictable. So sometimes you can leap ahead a lot in a few days. Other times you just feel completely stuck. So how can you manage that level of unpredictability? Well, within the agile world and Scrum, so you have this concept of a spike, which is a particular user story that's used for highly risky user stories. So for things that are difficult to predict regarding their results and their achievements. So you can create spikes for chunks of research that you want to create. And now, what is a spike? Well, a spike is just a user story, but it's, as I said, is a user story that has some high-level technical risk or some level of high-level risk. And the important thing about a spike is that it is time boxed. So you know that, for example, you're allocating that amount of effort, that amount of time to that user story, to that spike. And then within that time box, the researcher is going to be able to experiment as much as he or she wants. Right? So the researchers can create a lot of new models, see what works, what doesn't work, and try to rush to arrive at a result by the end of the allocated time for that specific spike. So if you work in spikes, you are going to have self-contained unit packages, work that you can use to advance your research. I've seen many companies where there is a big problem, which is no communication between the production and the research teams. Indeed, it's extremely important that there is a form of communication flow between these two teams, and this communication should be bidirectional. It's very important that the research team is aware of what the production team is doing, Because sometimes the production team is building stuff, infrastructure that the research team can use to advance their research or to facilitate their research process. And on the other hand, or like the inverse is also like very important, because the production team is the one responsible for actually implementing at production level the research that the research team has put out. As I mentioned earlier, the quality of the code of the researchers isn't necessarily that high. So what this basically means is that the production team should get all the models or all the ideas developed by the researchers and then implement them into production. Now, how do we ensure that communication is there? Well, I highly suggest to have demo sessions, for example, at the end of a sprint within an agile environment, so that all the members of the research team are aware of what the production team is doing and vice versa. So this is going to literally streamline your development process and enable that two teams are on the same page and work in a coordinated manner. The last thing that I want to touch upon is this idea of rotating people inside these two teams. So you may have like people who are very curious, or employees who are very curious to experiment with new things. And so people who've spent, for example, 6 months or 1 year doing research, perhaps want to try out a little bit of production, and vice versa. People who have been in production for 6 months, for example, want to, I don't know, just try out what it feels to do actual research. And I think like this is an extremely interesting way of kind of like increasing the skills of the team overall, and also cementing the kind of like a communication and cementing the personal relationships within different teams. So yeah, consider shifting people from one team to another based on, of course, like on their needs and what they want to do. These were a few suggestions on how to balance production and research within an AI-driven or tech-driven company. Now, if you want more details or want to learn more or need more specific consulting, you can go to my website, which you have up here, and there you can get in contact with me. I consult also like in this particular area, so how to set up a production and research in a kind of good manner for your company. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next time. Take care.